Hey there, and welcome to Terror Appreciation Tuesday, where I celebrate all things horror. That means the characters, the performances, and the creative choices that didn't just scare audiences, they changed the genre itself. Today, I'm talking about Norman Bates and the performance by Anthony Perkins that permanently altered how horror portrays monsters. Norman Bates is frightening because he doesn't look like danger. He looks like someone you'd trust. And at that time, that was radical. Before Norman Bates, horror villains were often external threats. Creatures, strangers, invaders. Norman was different. He was familiar, polite, awkward, and disarming. Anthony Perkins really leaned into that vulnerability. He played Norman as someone uncomfortable in his own skin. Nervous, eager to please, quietly fractured. The performance doesn't rely on menace. It relies on unease. Every smile feels a little too practiced. Every pause feels like something being held back. The brilliance of Perkins' portrayal is that the horror exists before the reveal. Long before the audience understands Norman's psychology, they feel it. Norman Bates isn't a character who transforms into a monster. He is a character who has always been split. In the film, simply let us notice. That split is what made Norman Bates revolutionary. He isn't driven by rage or revenge. He's driven by repression, fear, guilt, obedience, and identity collapse inward until violence becomes inevitable. Anthony Perkins communicates that internal war without exposition. It's in his posture, his voice, the way Norman seems smaller when confronted. That subtlety matters because it taught horror something crucial. The scariest villains don't need to perform evil. They need to hide it. Norman Bates also redefined the idea of sympathy in horror. Audiences didn't just fear him, they felt for him. And that discomfort, the act of empathizing with someone dangerous, became a cornerstone of psychological horror. Perkins' performance made that empathy unavoidable. You don't excuse Norman, but you do understand him. And understanding is terrifying. Norman Bates changed how horror treats identity. He isn't possessed by an outside force. He is at war with himself. That internalized horror, the idea that the mind itself can become the monster, opened the door for generations of psychological horror stories, which is one of my favorite things to write. Now, you have quiet killers to unreliable narrators. Norman's DNA is everywhere, and Anthony Perkins carried that role with extraordinary care. Across multiple appearances, he never turned Norman into a caricature. He preserved the fertility of the character, the sadness, the tension between who Norman wants to be and who he can't escape. That consistency is why the character has endured for decades. Norman Bates didn't just shock audiences, he taught horror to whisper. He showed that terror could be intimate, internal, and unsettlingly human. And that lesson still defines the genre today. Now, if you're drawn to horror that focuses on character rather than spectacle, on psychology rather than shock, Norman Bates is essential viewing. And Anthony Perkins' performance remains one of the most influential in horror history. If that kind of horror resonates with you, where fear comes from character, restraint, and implication, there is a lot more to explore. I dive deeper into horror history, iconic characters, and performances like this. So if you want to keep this around, like, comment, and subscribe. And if you're a writer looking to create unsettling characters without relying on excess, characters who disrupt simply by existing, I share weekly craft notes, folklore breakdowns, and storytelling advice on my Substack inside the writer's room. You can find the links in my bio. Until next time, sometimes the quietest minds are the most dangerous.